to the Pig and Whistle Tales from Azeroth. As always, here at the Pig and Whistle Inn in Stormwind, I go through a variety of subjects with regards to World of Warcraft. I grab a bottle or a pint, sit back and enjoy, and this midweek episode of Rate My Dungeon, we're coming to the penultimate dungeon of Classic, and that is Scholomance. We're starting to get into the Plaguelands dungeons. Now, Scholomance is located in Western Plaguelands, yep, and it is located on an island called Cairdarrow, I believe it is called, or the town is called Cairdarrow, and essentially Scholomance is a academy, essentially a wizard kind of academy, that obviously fell to the Scourge and sort of became a undead Scourge academy. Scholomance is probably one of the higher and tougher dungeons that you will face at the end of Classic. It has a lot of quests relating to it, as well as one of the main quests being the Paladin Epic Mount that is tied to it. You go in there and you essentially have to do a cleansing ritual, or you have to survive waves of enemies down in the basement, and you eventually claim your Epic Mount, which is really cool. So it has a lot of lore to it. It has a lot of quests to it. How is the dungeon itself? It has 15 bosses in total, and that is without rares. There's no rares in this dungeon at all. All of them drop for very unique items. So I do have to say that 6 of these bosses are in the last room, and essentially they're all in their own little sections of the room. And they can drop pretty much mostly the same gear. It's a lot of 0.5 tier pieces, but they're still bosses. They are still very tough. You still need to respect them, so they are still bosses. But a lot of these bosses have some very good gear. Some are best in slot. The staff, for example, from the very last boss, the Gandling staff, I believe it's called, is very, very good, as well as a bow, which is very good for hunters. And you have other bits and pieces that are very useful, such as recipes from Raz Frostwinter, for Alchemist for Major Mana Potion, I believe. It might be the flask, actually. I believe it's one of the flask recipes. And speaking of alchemy, Scholomance is the only place, apart from Blackwing Lair, that you could make flasks in Classic. So essentially, if you wanted to stock up on flasks for your raid, you would have to make a Scholomance run, and you would have to go quite substantially far into the dungeon in order to make your flasks. So yeah, that was really it's a massive importance in terms of raiding Scholomance. Even before you're in raid, that's where you got to make your flasks at. So very important. In the game itself, back in Classic. Was the layout of the dungeons simple? It was. It was very simple, but at the same time, it wasn't very linear. So what I mean by this is it's linear until you get to a certain point, then you can branch off and do your own thing. You can go left to the last bosses, you can go straight forward to go and kill Rattlegore in the basement, or you can go right to kill Jandis and stuff. So you had the option to just skip a couple bosses and head straight to the final boss. You had the option to do all of the bosses. You had many options, and it didn't feel like you're on a linear path. You got to explore. You got to, do whatever you wanted in the instance itself, which makes it feel really good, really unique every time that you go into the instance. So very good, and a W on that part. Any dungeon that has that, in my opinion, is a very good dungeon. For the most part, anyway. So, did it get a revamp in Cataclysm? It didn't. It was one of the dungeons that wasn't revamped in Cataclysm. This is due to the fact that it's not too long of a dungeon. It's actually quite short, the dungeon, compared to something like Wailing Caverns or Gnomeregan. For 15 bosses in a dungeon, you'd think it's huge. You'd think it's a ginormous dungeon. But no, it is one of the smaller instances. It's about the same sort of size as Deadmines, but I do believe that Deadmines might be a bit bigger in terms of just how long it takes to walk from one end to the other, essentially. So, and that's quite weird because Dead Mind has half of the amount of bosses at 8. So yeah, it's a weird one to say the least. But this is why it didn't really get a revamp. It got a small one, in terms of like maybe the layout of it. Instead of going down the stairs as you enter, and you can go straight on to basically go to the first boss room and stuff like that. You have to go past the first boss in order to get to the next room. They just made a little revamp or an extra or a different doorway, essentially, so that people didn't like skip out on a boss or anything like that, skip out on any important quest items that you wanted to pick up in the first room. So with all of that, it's got very good loot. The size of the dungeon is very good. It's not linear. It's quite noob friendly, if I do say so myself. It's got a lot of bosses. Really, yeah, it's a very solid instance. And this being one of the ones that you would see probably at max level and is still very much relevant at max level, more so than like Diamol for just the buffs, in terms of actually like consistently going in there even after you've gotten your gear just to make the flasks. It's very important, and they've done a really good job with it, especially the lore behind it. There's a lot of quests relating to Caer Darrow and Scholomance, so it's really worth like looking up into the quests that send you there and that you do inside the instance themselves, because lore-wise it is very, very good also. What would I give it as a rating? I would give it a solid 7. I'd give it a very solid 7 out of 10, mainly on the basis that it's a lot packed into a little. I say little, it's still a substantial sized dungeon, but it feels a lot less than what it is, essentially. But the NPCs are really good, the mobs in there are very good. The only problem that you have is that you have to have a quest item to summon a certain boss, and you can get lost looking for your quest items in the instance unless you know exactly where they are. But I'd say it's a really good dungeon. The mobs in there are very good. The bosses hit very hard. They're not too challenging, but they're challenging enough. And yeah, it's very good. A very solid dungeon. I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. Maybe an 8, but again, it's tough to give it anything an 8 because you're starting to look at the very high quality dungeons, and I don't think they've really produced any of them until Wrath of the Lich King, I would say. I'd say Wrath of the Lich King is when they started to produce the higher quality dungeons, in my honest opinion. Well, that and Zul'Farrak, because I love Zul'Farrak. I think it's absolutely amazing. But that is it for this episode. Thank you all very much for listening. Do check out the Patreon as well as the Twitch and YouTube. The Twitch will be going live at... No, not Saturday. I was going to say Saturday for some reason. Wednesday at 5 GMT, we're going to be having our AWC qualifiers. So be sure to tune in, come help and cheer us on. It's we're just there for fun. We're just a group of like friends that want to have some fun and test it out, see how we do essentially. But yeah, it'll really mean a lot if you're peeping your head in to the stream and giving us a little cheer. But thank you all once again very much, and go with Valor, friend. Goodbye all.